Matthew Evans, a wealthy man nearing 80, sat alone in his silver Mercedes, his hand drumming impatiently on the steering wheel. The air conditioning fought a losing battle against the Kentucky heat, but nothing seemed able to alleviate the tension building inside him. He had always been in control, his fortune built on financial acumen, but right now he felt lost, alone, and frustrated with a flat tire, far from comfort, a world away from his immaculate mansion on the city outskirts. He tried calling roadside assistance, but to no avail. Despair began to set in. He took a deep breath, accepting the reality that he would have to wait, options exhausted. Frustration mounted until something caught his eye. A figure walking down the road towards the car. It was a boy, perhaps 13 or 14, wearing a faded t-shirt and worn trainers, but with a determined expression. Matthew watched him approach, noticing the boy's keen gaze as he assessed the car. "Got a flat tire, sir?" the boy asked, with a calmness surprising for his age. Yes, Matthew replied, feeling a mixture of relief and unease. "I was waiting for help, but my phone doesn't get a signal here." The boy offered a gentle smile. "I can help," he said, quickly kneeling beside the tire without hesitation. "My granddad taught me how to change tires last summer. Got a spare?" Matthew indicated the boot, watching as the boy opened it and retrieved the necessary tools. The boy worked with a dexterity that seemed beyond his years. Matthew silently felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: humility. It was as if, for the first time in years, he was witnessing something genuine and pure. He wanted to offer the boy something, a reward, but the young man didn't even look up, concentrating on the task. A few minutes later, the job was done. The boy stood up, wiping his hands on his trousers. "There," he said, with a quiet smile. "All done." Matthew, still holding money in his hand, offered some notes. "Here, please accept this. Thank you very much for your help." The boy politely raised his hand, refusing. "Thank you, sir, but I don't need anything. I was just happy to help." Matthew, surprised, stood still, watching the boy walk away. The scene touched him in a way he couldn't explain. He felt unsettled, but also profoundly grateful. He put the money back in his wallet and got into the car, looking in the rear-view mirror as the boy's figure disappeared into the distance. Throughout the drive home, his thoughts returned to that boy. Something about him was different, and Matthew couldn't shake the feeling that there was something there, something profound that he couldn't quite grasp. That night, sitting alone in his leather armchair in his study, surrounded by bookshelves he rarely opened, Matthew found himself reliving the scene with the boy. His house was silent, the only sound the tick-tock of an antique clock on the wall. Dinner sat untouched, carefully prepared, but Matthew couldn't eat. He kept thinking about it. Throughout his life, he had met thousands of people, partners, employees, investors. They all had an exchange, an expectation, a price to pay. But this boy, this stranger, had helped without expecting anything in return. He seemed to have nothing, yet he carried something far rarer: dignity. The following morning, Matthew couldn't resist the urge to find the boy. He wasn't quite sure why, but he felt something was missing. Perhaps it was guilt, perhaps gratitude, or perhaps just curiosity. He got in his car and drove down the same road, trying to spot the boy. Hours passed, and Matthew stopped at petrol stations and small diners, asking everyone about a boy matching the description. Most people didn't know who he was talking about until finally an older woman behind a counter spoke. "You must be talking about Elijah," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "That boy always helps others around here. He lives with his mother in Harlan." "Harlan," Matthew repeated, mentally noting the name. "Thank you." Harlan was a small town in the Appalachian Mountains, an hour away. The drive was scenic, but Matthew barely noticed the landscape. His mind was full of questions. What kind of life did this boy lead? What kind of parents raised someone like him? When he arrived in Harlan, the town was quiet, with calm streets and simple houses. He asked a few people about Elijah and was soon directed to a small farmhouse on the outskirts. The place was simple but well kept, with a slightly sagging porch. Matthew parked his car and hesitated for a moment, unsure what to say. Taking a deep breath, he knocked on the door, which was opened by a woman, probably in her 40s. She looked tired but kind, her eyes alert and curious. "Can I help you?" she asked. "Good morning," Matthew said, swallowing hard. "Sorry to bother you, but I think I met your son yesterday. Elijah, right? He helped me with a flat tire." The woman's expression softened immediately. "That's typical of Elijah," she said with a small smile. "He always helps others." "I just wanted to thank him personally," Matthew said. "He wouldn't accept anything from me, and I'd like to repay him somehow." She nodded and stepped aside. "He's in the back. You can wait if you like." Matthew entered the house, observing its simplicity. The furniture was old but well maintained, and the walls were covered with family photos and some drawings that appeared to be Elijah's from when he was younger. The atmosphere of the place was welcoming, unlike his own cold, immense house. He followed the woman to the backyard where Elijah was mending the fence. "Hi, sir," Elijah said, surprised to see him. "What are you doing here?" Matthew smiled, feeling a little uncomfortable. "I wanted to thank you again. You helped me when I really needed it, and I can't stop thinking about it." Elijah shrugged with a genuine smile. "It was nothing." Matthew looked around, noticing the backyard with its makeshift fence, the uneven lawn, and the rusty swing set in the background. It was clear that Elijah's family didn't have much, but they made do with what they had. "You're a very clever boy," Matthew commented, genuinely impressed. "Your mother must be very proud of you." Elijah smiled, looking towards the house. "She works hard. I try to help." Matthew fell silent for a moment, reflecting on those words. He remembered his own childhood in a simple house like this one, with parents who also worked hard for everything they had. Gradually, over the years, he had drifted away from those values, immersing himself in the pursuit of wealth and status. Now, facing Elijah and his family, he felt a wave of nostalgia mixed with regret. "I wanted to do something for you and your mother," Matthew finally said. Elijah raised his hand, as if asking him not to insist. "We're fine, sir. We don't need anything." "It's not about needing," Matthew insisted. "It's about what's right. You helped me, and I'd like to reciprocate." Before Elijah could respond, his mother appeared at the door, calling him for lunch. "Elijah, come in before the food gets cold," she said, then turned to Matthew. "Would you like to have lunch with us?" "It's nothing special, but you're welcome." Matthew hesitated. He'd never been good at accepting simple offers, but the woman's genuine tone left no room for refusal. "I'd like that," he said, following her inside. In the kitchen, the smell of freshly baked bread and roasted vegetables filled the air. The table was small, with mismatched, simple chairs, but it was carefully laid. Matthew sat, uncomfortable in his suit, surrounded by an environment so far removed from his own world of luxury. Elijah joined them, smiling as always, while his mother shared stories about the community and how people helped each other. Matthew listened intently, feeling something he hadn't experienced in years: genuine connection. He felt the human warmth of these people, something his large mansion had never offered. The meal was simple, but full of human warmth. After lunch, while helping to clear the table, Matthew turned to Elijah's mother. "You've done a remarkable job raising this boy," he said. "He has more heart than many people I've met." She smiled, her eyes shining. "He's a good boy, but we've been through hardships. We've learned to appreciate the small things." Matthew thought for a moment. He wanted to do more for this family. He wanted to give something back. It wasn't about charity, but about honoring the boy, his generosity and his mother's strength. The following afternoon, Matthew planned his course of action. It wouldn't be simple help, but something that could bring stability and recognition to the family. He didn't want them to live with what they had, but with what they deserved. In the following days, Matthew made several calls, arranging for renovations to Elijah's house. A week later, the lorries began to arrive, and the workmen started transforming the house. The couple and Elijah were astonished. When his mother questioned him, Matthew replied, "You haven't just survived, you've thrived. Let me give something back." As the renovations progressed, Elijah tried to help, but Matthew sent him to rest. "Your job now is to enjoy your childhood," he said with a smile. Elijah, with his inquisitive gaze, watched the workmen, and one of them, Joe, even invited him to learn how to measure and cut wood. Over time, Elijah became so involved that Matthew began to see in him a desire to pursue a career in construction. On the final night of the project, the family gathered on the porch to see the completed work. The house was now transformed, with the old swing replaced by a new one, the fence strengthened, and the roof repaired. His mother, with tears in her eyes, said, "This isn't just a house, it's a home now. I don't know how we can thank you." Matthew smiled. "You've already thanked me. You've reminded me of what life is really about: family, connection, purpose." Elijah, still full of energy, looked at Matthew and said, "I want to do this one day. Help others like you did for us." Matthew put his hand on Elijah's shoulder. "You're already doing it," he said firmly. "Your generosity is what brought all this about." Evening fell, and the three of them sat together on the porch, watching the sky change from golden to deep orange. It was warm, but not just the warmth of the day, but the human warmth of a genuine connection. When Matthew said goodbye, Elijah and his mother walked him to his car. The boy's smile and his mother's emotional gaze stayed with him as he drove home. He knew this wasn't the end, but only the beginning of a new chapter for all of them. In the following weeks, Elijah began to learn about construction with the help of the workmen who had renovated his house. His desire to understand manual work blossomed into a passion. Matthew continued to return to the town, no longer as a stranger, but as someone who was now part of their lives. For the first time in years, he felt at peace and content. What began with a simple act of kindness from a boy with worn-out trainers and a huge heart transformed not only his own life, but the lives of everyone around him. And Matthew realized that true value lay not in what one had, but in what one gave to others. Matthew continued to return to Harlan in the following weeks. What was once a sporadic and uncertain journey soon became a routine. He didn't know exactly what he was looking for, but he felt something calling him there, as if he were finally returning to a place he hadn't known he needed. He felt lighter with each visit, and the sense of belonging intensified. He no longer saw Elijah's small house as a modest refuge. It was a vibrant space, full of an energy he didn't feel in his large mansion, filled with cold walls and endless corridors. As Elijah immersed himself more and more in the world of construction, learning the basics of carpentry and repairs from the workers Matthew had hired, the boy developed a genuine passion for what he did. He followed the workers with genuine enthusiasm, always asking curious questions, always eager to learn more. It was as if he had found his place in the world, and Matthew knew he was only just beginning. Each day Elijah became more confident, more determined to forge a path that could lead him to great things. But unlike Matthew, the boy didn't seem to be seeking wealth or status. He wanted something more. He wanted to make his mark, to be useful to others. Elijah's transformation didn't go unnoticed. The townspeople, who previously saw him as just a boy who spent his time helping here and there, began to perceive his potential. They saw how dedicated he was, how he absorbed the teachings, how he committed himself to each task. Matthew also noticed the changes, and with that, he began to realize how much Elijah had influenced his own life. Something that seemed so small at the time, when he'd only asked for help with a tire, had transformed into a profound lesson about what truly mattered in life. Matthew himself found himself more humble, more attentive to the needs of others, more conscious of his own choices. He was no longer the man who thought money was the answer to everything. He now saw the value of human connections, empathy, and generosity without expecting anything in return. Elijah and his mother, in turn, continued to live with the simplicity that characterized them. The renovated house brought comfort, but it didn't change their essence. They weren't there just because the house was now new. They were there because it represented a symbol of strength and resilience. For them, what mattered was what they were building together. A quieter life, yet still full of daily challenges and victories. Matthew knew this. He understood that the greatest gift he could offer them wasn't in the renovations or the money he had invested, but in the confidence that they could follow their own paths, that they needed nothing more than what they already had, themselves and their determination. Time passed, and the friendship between Matthew, Elijah, and his mother strengthened. Matthew had become a constant figure in their lives, but no longer as a distant benefactor. He was now a friend, someone they could rely on. And perhaps for the first time, he felt the warmth of true friendship, the kind that wasn't tied to favors or interests, but to the simple pleasure of being in the company of those who truly cared. On one of his visits, Matthew spent more time talking with Elijah's mother. She was more relaxed now, not like before, when she always seemed overburdened with hard work. She was beginning to accept the changes more calmly, with the certainty that, even in difficult times, life always had something to offer. Their conversation was tranquil, full of laughter and stories about simple life and the difficulties they had faced over the years. Matthew learned more about the woman's past, about the daily struggles to keep her family together, but also about the beauty in the small things he himself often overlooked. "I don't know how you do it," Matthew said in one of these conversations, looking at her with an admiring smile. "I find myself wondering how you keep everything running, always so balanced." She chuckled softly. "There's no secret, Matthew. It's just doing what needs to be done and looking after those who are with you. Sometimes the hardest thing is not getting lost in the midst of difficulties, but when you have the love and support of those who matter, everything becomes easier." These words stayed with Matthew. He felt a stronger connection with this simple yet wise woman. He had lived a life surrounded by material possessions, but now understood that none of it could replace the value of genuine relationships. He reflected on his own life as he watched Elijah get excited about a new building project, his eyes shining with enthusiasm. Matthew began to realize that for him, something was missing, a sense of purpose. One autumn afternoon, as leaves gently fell from the trees and the crisp air filled Elijah's house, Matthew made a decision. He knew he was ready for something new, something more meaningful. He sat down with Elijah and his mother, a gesture that now felt natural. "I've been thinking. I know that things often become difficult when you try to do what's right, but I want you to know that if you need anything, there's no distance between us anymore. It's not a matter of charity. I want to be a partner, a true friend. What you and your mother have done for me is priceless. I've learned more from you both than from any book or business meeting. And now I want to help in whatever way I can, genuinely, without expecting anything in return, just to see you grow." Elijah looked at Matthew, surprised, but with a genuine smile on his face. "You've already helped us, sir. We don't need anything more. Your friendship alone is enough." Matthew smiled back, feeling the genuine gratitude in his words. He felt at peace, as if everything he needed was already before him, not in the form of riches, but in something far more lasting, the human connections he had neglected for so many years. He knew he was in the right place, with the right people. In the following months, their friendship deepened further. Elijah gained more skills, and his mother, more relaxed, was finally able to rest from her daily chores. The small group of friends knew they were doing something bigger than simply building or renovating a house. They were building a future where the value of generosity, empathy, and friendship prevailed over everything others considered important. Matthew realized that in the end, it was more than just helping to fix a flat tire. He had found something he didn't know he was missing, something he had never known how to seek, but which, unknowingly, had always been before him. He had found the true essence of life, something he had been searching for in the wrong places for so long. Now he knew what truly mattered was what he could give, not what he possessed. And so, as the years passed, Matthew and his new family continued to support each other. The small house, now full of memories and laughter, had become a true home. And Matthew knew that, as their friendship grew, he was finally living the way he should have always lived, no longer seeking status or money, but seeking the things that truly matter: connection, generosity, and love. In time, life in Harlan followed its quiet course, but for Matthew, nothing was more important than the peace he had found there. His regular visits had become a habit he didn't intend to break. Each trip to the small town, each moment with Elijah and his mother, brought a renewed sense of purpose. The man who was once lost in his own relentless pursuit of wealth now found satisfaction in simple things. He began to understand that his presence in Harlan, his friendship with that family, was a gift he didn't know he needed. Elijah, in turn, continued to dedicate himself diligently to learning about construction. His curiosity wasn't limited to the basics. He began to draw his own designs, to imagine how he could transform spaces, how he could create something lasting. The way he threw himself into each task reflected his desire to learn and to become something more than his life circumstances might suggest. It was visible to anyone who looked closely that the boy possessed a practical intelligence and a problem-solving ability that went beyond his years. Matthew sometimes found himself reflecting on the boy and how he had taught him, without even trying. When he first met him, Elijah seemed to be just a teenager in worn-out trainers and a faded t-shirt, but over time he realized that the boy possessed something rare, a quiet wisdom, a way of seeing the world that didn't depend on material possessions or status. This was something Matthew gradually began to understand and value. What had initially seemed like simple help to a stranger had transformed into a profound lesson about life, humility, and generosity. September arrived, bringing with it the promise of a new phase in Elijah's life. He was no longer the shy boy who, with a simple act of kindness, had impressed Matthew. Now he was growing, both physically and emotionally. His eyes were more attentive to what was happening around him, and his steps firmer, more confident. He knew what he wanted. When Matthew invited him to lunch at his mansion, something he had done several times in the previous weeks, Elijah accepted with a smile. But now there was something different about him. He seemed more at ease, more self-assured, as if the world was more his than before. At the meeting, sitting at the table with Matthew and his mother, Elijah seemed to be reflecting on what lay ahead. He knew the future would be challenging, but he felt he was ready to face it. His mother, in turn, looked proudly at her son, While Matthew watched the two of them with a mixture of respect and admiration, he who had once been obsessed with the idea of controlling the destiny of others now saw that true strength didn't come from having control over circumstances, but from knowing how to react to them. He saw in the woman from Harlan and her son a resilience he no longer knew he possessed. It was a quiet strength, one that didn't need applause or public recognition to exist. Lunch was simple, but full of meaningful conversation. Elijah talked about his plans for the future, about his desire to study engineering and build something that could truly impact people. His mother, with her attentive and serene gaze, shared stories of the town, of the difficulties they had faced, but also of the small victories that were celebrated with such affection. For Matthew, those stories began to intertwine with his own life in a way he had never imagined. He found himself, for a moment, distant from everything he had known until then, and closer to a life he had previously considered too simple. The project that had begun with the renovation of Elijah's house continued to bear fruit. The house, which was now not only renovated but transformed, had become a symbol of a new journey. For Matthew, the house represented not just the renovation of a physical structure, but the restoration of his own essence. He saw the effort of all the workers, Elijah's smile as he looked at what was being created, and felt a warmth in his chest, as if he were finally doing something worthwhile. Days passed, and he felt the transformation wasn't only happening in Elijah's house, but within him too. Each visit, each conversation, each moment shared with the family helped him reconnect with a part of himself that had been forgotten amidst years of chasing material wealth. It was one such afternoon, while the three of them were on the veranda watching the sunset, that Matthew asked a question that had been nagging at him for some time. "Have you thought about your future, Elijah?" he asked, his voice soft but full of curiosity. The boy looked at him with shining eyes, that characteristic gleam of someone who knows what they want from life. "Yes," Elijah replied, simply but firmly. "I want to do something that helps people, something that's important to them. I've always seen how much a place can change a person's life, someone's home, the space where they live. If I can help people have a better place, I'll feel fulfilled." Matthew smiled, impressed by the clarity in the boy's words. It was clear to him that Elijah didn't just want to change people's lives with what he built. He wanted to change the world in a deeper way, with purpose and intention. "I know you'll manage it," Matthew said, with the certainty that only comes from experience. "You have what it takes." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of a car arriving. It was the father of one of Elijah's colleagues, looking for him for another day's work. The boy got up quickly, ready for another task. His steps were firmer than ever, and Matthew watched him with silent pride. He knew this boy was destined for great things. That night, as Elijah and his mother prepared for bed, Matthew reflected on what he had just witnessed. He had seen the evolution of a boy who, at first, seemed to be just an ordinary young man from a simple town. But over time, he had transformed into an example of resilience, dedication, and generosity. Elijah, with his kindness, had touched Matthew's life in a way he never imagined possible. For Matthew, the change he experienced was more than just learning. It was an internal revolution, a discovery of something that had always been there, at his disposal, but which he had never had the courage to seek. The value of true friendship, of generosity without ulterior motives, of the simple pleasure of doing good to one's neighbor. In the end, Matthew knew that what he had found in Harlan wasn't in any fortune or in the riches he had accumulated over the years. What he found there was the true essence of life, something that couldn't be bought, something that could only be lived and shared. And for the first time in a long time, he felt he was exactly where he should be. He knew that, alongside Elijah and his mother, he had found what truly mattered. True happiness wasn't in possessing, but in giving and connecting genuinely with others. The future was uncertain, but Matthew knew that as long as he was on that path, he would be in the right place with the right people. Because what he had learned, more than anything else, was that true wealth lay in what he could offer the world, not in what he possessed. And so, with a heart full of gratitude and a soul at peace, he moved forward, knowing that his journey of transformation was far from over. It was only just beginning. Life in Harlan continued its course, with a routine that, for Matthew, felt increasingly natural. Elijah and his mother's house, now completely renovated, became a symbol of something he could no longer ignore. True happiness lay in simplicity, in the things that truly mattered. In the months that followed, the town grew accustomed to Matthew's constant presence, as he spent more and more time there with the boy and his mother. The three of them became a kind of unlikely, yet solid, little family. Elijah continued to develop his skills, and the dream of becoming an engineer seemed more tangible each day. Matthew became his mentor, guiding him when necessary, and always available to help him understand more about the intricacies of the construction world. He knew the boy had what it took to go far, far more than he had imagined when he first met him. It was impressive to see how dedicated Elijah was and how his passion for construction deepened, something that Matthew, with all his experience in the business world, rarely saw in other people. But for Matthew, the true transformation lay not only in Elijah, but in himself. Over the months, he had been learning to slow down, to stop and observe life around him. He began to question why, for so many years, he had been chasing something that never truly fulfilled him. The incessant pursuit of more and more money, of status, and the conquest of a world that seemed so empty. All of this began to make less and less sense. The emptiness he had felt before was filled by something simple yet profound, a sense of purpose that came from helping others, from being genuinely present in the lives of those around him. The following autumn, as the golden leaves fell from the trees and the crisp air brought with it a sense of new beginnings, Matthew decided to do something that had been on his mind for some time. He wanted to ensure that Elijah had every opportunity possible to reach his potential, without the limitations that money might impose. When he mentioned this to Elijah's mother, she looked at him with an understanding gaze, as if she knew this moment would come. "I know what you're thinking," she said calmly with a gentle expression. "You want to ensure Elijah has a fair chance, don't you?" Matthew nodded. "Yes, that's right. I want to ensure he can study wherever he wants, without worrying about finances. I don't know if that's what he wants, but the only thing I can do is give him that opportunity." The woman looked at Matthew for a long moment as if weighing his words. "You've already given us more than any amount of money could offer," she said finally. "But if you truly think this is best for Elijah, who am I to stop you? I just want him to be happy." These words deeply touched Matthew. He knew that, more than any other material gesture, what he was doing was a true demonstration of faith in Elijah's future. He genuinely believed the boy had a bright future and wanted to give him the tools to achieve that future. That night, Matthew spent some time reflecting on everything that had happened since the day he found the boy on the road. How everything had changed so rapidly, yet in such a natural way. He no longer felt the weight of the loneliness that had previously accompanied him. He had found something far more valuable than any financial success. He had found true friendship, connection, and finally, a way to give something back to the world. As Elijah became increasingly involved with the world of construction, observing and learning from the professionals Matthew had brought in, he began to wonder about his own future. He knew his path was challenging, but now, with the support of Matthew and his mother, he felt better prepared to face it. Sometimes he found himself looking at Harlan's old house, now a renovated place full of life and promise, and thought about how life can change with small gestures, with seemingly simple decisions that transform someone's entire journey. One morning, Elijah decided he would talk to Matthew about his own plans. He knew Matthew's support was crucial to his future, but he also wanted to express his gratitude for everything he had done. "I want to be someone who really makes a difference, you know? Not just a good builder, but someone who can help transform the world in the same way you helped me. I want to be someone who, when I look back, knows I did something good. I don't know exactly how I'm going to do it, but I know that building is my path. I just wanted to thank you for everything." Matthew smiled, feeling the weight of Elijah's words. He knew the boy was at a turning point, and what he was saying wasn't just a vague promise. Elijah was beginning to understand the power of action, dedication, and the will to do something bigger than himself. "You're already making a difference," Matthew replied, his voice soft. "What you have, Elijah, is something you don't learn in books or universities. You have heart, you have courage, and above all, you have the desire to truly help others. That, my friend, is more important than any degree or award." Matthew's words stayed with Elijah for a long time. He knew there was still much to learn, but he also knew he was on the right path. He didn't have the answers to all the questions, but each day he got closer to his goal. He knew the future wouldn't be easy, but he was ready to face it, with the strength his mother had given him and the wisdom Matthew had shared. In the months that followed, Elijah enrolled in a technical school in a nearby town where he could learn more about engineering and design. He knew this was only the beginning of his journey, but he also knew he had the determination to move forward. His mother, her heart full of pride, helped him make the move, and Matthew remained by their side, no longer as a distant benefactor, but as a true friend, ready to support them every step of the way. Time passed, but Matthew remained in Harlan, always present, always willing to help when needed, but also always learning from the simplicity of life that others had taught him. As Elijah grew and transformed, Matthew found himself increasingly inspired by his own desire to give back to the world everything he had learned from that boy. In the end, what began with a simple act of kindness had transformed into something much greater. It wasn't just a story of how a rich, lonely man helped a poor boy. It was the story of how two lives intersected, changing everything each knew about the world, about the value of friendship, humility, and above all, generosity, without expecting anything in return. And so, as Elijah prepared for the next phase of his journey, Matthew knew that deep down, they had transformed each other in ways they both could never have imagined. They had found, ultimately, what truly mattered in life: each other. The year passed quickly, and with it, the transformations in Harlan continued to occur, albeit in a quiet and constant way. Elijah, now a young man with dreams bigger than his hometown could imagine, was already further from home. He enrolled in the technical school and frequently traveled to the neighboring town, where more formal education in construction and engineering awaited him. His mother, her eyes full of pride and concern, always supported him, aware that this was the first step towards a future he was shaping himself. Matthew, in turn, no longer saw himself as the man he used to be. The visits to Harlan, which were once mere occasional trips, had become an essential part of his routine. He was no longer that distant businessman, shut away in his mansion and isolated from everything. He had become someone who, for the first time, valued genuine human contact, someone who understood that true wealth lay in giving, not accumulating. He dedicated his time no longer to seeking power or prestige, but to helping others, to giving others something that for so long he had had in abundance, the opportunity of a better life. Time, however, does not forgive, and change is not always easy to accept. Harlan still had its difficulties, and Elijah, his heart full of dreams and plans, knew that the road ahead would not be easy. He sometimes felt a longing for what he had left behind. His mother, who had always been his greatest support, also felt the weight of separation. However, they knew they were heading in the right direction, even if the future was still uncertain. During a weekend, when Matthew returned to Harlan, he found Elijah in a moment of reflection, something rare for the determined boy. They were sitting on the porch of the renovated house, both silent, looking out at the quiet street. The sun was setting on the horizon, painting the sky orange and pink, an image that had always made Elijah think about what he wanted from life. After a few minutes, he finally broke the silence, his voice low and thoughtful. "I miss home," Elijah said, gazing at the empty road ahead. "But I know I'm doing the right thing. I know I have to move on, even if it's hard." Matthew, who had always been good at observing others, felt the weight of the boy's words. He knew that for someone so young, this feeling of separation and uncertainty was difficult to bear. But he also knew that Elijah was on the right path, because he wasn't running away from his origins. He was simply evolving, going where his dreams were taking him. "You're doing what you need to do, Elijah," Matthew replied, his voice soft but firm. "And that's more important than anything. You have a vision, and that's rare. Many people go through life without ever knowing what they really want, but you do. The boy smiled, but it was a melancholic smile, as if he was still absorbing the magnitude of what he was leaving behind. I know. It's just that sometimes I miss all of it. My mother, you, even the old house. Matthew leaned forward slightly, his eyes fixed on the horizon. You're not leaving anything behind, Elijah. Everything you need is already with you. You have what matters, what you've learned, who you've become. And that's more valuable than any house or town. Elijah looked at him with a gaze full of gratitude. He knew Matthew was right. He had become more than just a boy from Harlan. He had transformed into someone who had the ability to change his own life, and, who knows, the lives of others too. What he missed was not the house or the streets he was leaving behind, but the security, the comfort of the things he knew. But he knew that, to achieve what he wanted, he would have to leave those things behind. The conversation continued for some time, but the silence between them seemed more comfortable than before. The connection Matthew and Elijah shared was now deeper, as if both understood that, despite the changes occurring, the bond between them remained unbreakable. Matthew knew that, even if Elijah distanced himself physically, there would always be a link between them. And that link was far stronger than any distance. The following morning, as Elijah prepared for another trip to the neighboring town, Matthew stood silently for a moment, watching the boy with a sense of pride, but also sadness. He knew this was an inevitable phase, the moment when young people begin to forge their own paths. But at the same time, he knew Elijah was ready. He had watched him grow, transform, and learn, and he couldn't be prouder. Before leaving, Elijah went back to Matthew and gave him a quick hug. "Thank you, Matthew, for everything. I would never have got this far without you." Matthew smiled and squeezed the boy's shoulder. "It wasn't just me, Elijah. It was you. You're the one who made it all happen. I just showed you the way. The rest was down to you." With one last look at his mother's house and the man who had helped him become who he was, Elijah got into the car, ready for the next stage of his journey. Matthew, in turn, stood there, watching as the car drove away, a sense of peace filling his heart. The year that passed since that day felt like a complete cycle for Matthew. He had arrived in Harlan with the aim of helping, but what he didn't know was that he himself would be the one who learned the most. He found in Elijah the proof that, when you give something without expecting anything in return, the reward is infinitely greater. And he discovered that the greatest investment anyone can make in life is not in material wealth, but in the relationships they build, the lives they touch, and the transformations they bring about in the world. As Elijah drove away to pursue his own dreams, Matthew knew he had fulfilled his mission. He had helped shape the future of a young man, but he had also been transformed along the way. Harlan, the house, Elijah's mother, and even the renovation workers had all been essential pieces in the change he experienced. He knew that in some way all his efforts had contributed to Elijah becoming the man he was becoming. And more importantly, they had changed him too. When Matthew returned to his mansion at the end of that day, he felt different. He no longer felt alone, nor empty. He felt that somehow his life now had a greater purpose than the pursuit of success or recognition. He knew that if he had another chance to live his life, he would choose the same path, because in the end, what he had learned was that true happiness doesn't come from what we possess, but from what we can give to others. And that, to him, was the greatest wealth of all. With a quiet smile and a lighter heart, Matthew closed the door of his mansion, knowing that his journey, although different from before, would continue. Because indeed, he had learned the lesson we all must learn. True wealth lies in what you give, not in what you receive. And love, friendship, and generosity are the greatest gifts life can offer.